Let's talk about assessment as learning. The root of the word assessment is asidera, which means to sit beside. And if we truly think about what assessment is and should be, it should be a partnership, not a measurement process. So what we have to do before we start considering ways to reimagine assessment is to think about our current beliefs about learning and how those beliefs influence our decisions about assessment. So think about tradition and in what ways the things we've always been doing influence our current assessment practices. And what do you think is effective right now? What is working? Do current assessment practices provide equitable opportunities for all children to exceed? And how do you think modern contexts will influence the future of assessment in schools? We've learned an awful lot about what works and doesn't work in terms of technology integration, blended learning, online learning. How can we apply those lessons moving forward? We need to develop partnerships between student and teacher built around the relationship as co-learners seeking to understand, guide, and nurture new ideas, capabilities, and deeper understandings. This is all about trust. The student trusts the teacher to guide their learning without the need for external validation. The teacher trusts the student to do their best work. And the school and the parents trust the teacher to live the values and beliefs expected of a learning professional at all times. These are the core fundamental trust elements that need to be in place to bring reimagined assessment to life. So assessment as learning is about knowing your students, their personal experiences, their social identifiers, race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, family backgrounds, disabilities, learner variabilities, and their interests, their passions, their hopes, their dreams, and their fears. When we know our students, we can start with strengths and we can move away from the deficit models of assessment that have dominated our landscapes. And this happens through conversations with our learners. So let's ask our students, what are the realities you face as a learner today? And what role does technology play in your learning? What changes in the world do you believe most impact your learning? What are your hopes and dreams and your concerns and fears? There's a huge emphasis on SEL right now, especially. These conversations have to continue long after COVID has passed. And what this also means is that assessment as learning requires the teacher's role to shift away from the person who's doing the assessing at all times. Teachers instead are going to take the role of modeling, they will observe, they will get really good at asking the right questions, providing time, guidance, listening, and inspiration. They're going to become skilled at providing meaningful feedback, and they're going to show themselves as learners and be transparent in that. And we've, of course, experienced this influx of technology into our classroom spaces by necessity. But even pre-COVID, in what ways has technology changed what's possible in terms of classroom learning and assessment when learners of every age can share their learning and their creations outside of the school walls? And what examples of amplification of learning through authentic assessment and tech have you seen or read about? What have we experienced now during COVID times that will influence our future decisions about assessment? Has it become more obvious what works and what doesn't? Something to consider as you think about assessment as learning. How do you see roles being redefined in a more powerful assessment process? Assessment is often described for learning, of learning, and as learning. So let's take a look at some key differences in those descriptions. Assessment of learning, of course, is judgmental. It's summative. It makes decisions about placements, grades, and the teacher is the primary assessor. Assessment for learning, which you've learned a lot about this week, as it is a critical component of the entire assessment ecosystem, is where we use information to drive instructional decisions based on external standards or expectations. But still, in that case, the teacher is the primary assessor. Whereas if we shift to assessment as learning, we now see the student at the center of the process, striving to achieve personal goals. They are self-monitoring and they are adjusting their own paths based on what they've learned from their central standpoint. And what this includes are opportunities for authentic assessment. These are realistic, innovative, doing, not just telling the subject, replicating their simulations. These are contexts in which adults might experience the content in real life. And they require students to efficiently and effectively use a number of different skills and their knowledge base to negotiate tasks. And they allow a lot of opportunities for practice, for rehearsal, for consultation with experts, and for getting feedback along the way on their performances and their products. What can this look like? It can look like exhibitions, portfolio building, making thinking visible through capstone projects, student showcases. These things, while could be a little bit more difficult in our current space in the COVID times, these things can happen in virtual spaces as well. We really want to create conditions where students can embrace agency in their learning and giving them the opportunity to learn with peers, peer conferencing, feedback circles, gallery walks, collaborative projects. When we put the child at the center, we're cultivating environments that nurture self-assessment. We're using things like student design portfolios and student-led conferencing. We're always driving for that inquiry learning approach. We're starting with really powerful questions that come from the children. We're incorporating things like blogging, journaling, reflective writing, and we're focusing on students' habits and dispositions through learning. So lots of times teachers will hear these ideas and they'll be really excited about it. And they think, you know what, but my district tells me I have to do something a certain way. Well, there are things within your locus of control to help you shift to an assessment as learning. We can stop preparing kids for what's next. And we can stop using the testing regimes as excuses. We can stop relying on micromanagerial traditional assessment practices, and we can stop allowing inequitable and unjust assessment practices to hurt groups of kids. And instead, we can start honoring the learners that are in front of us each day and envision how assessment can better support their learning by placing them at the center of the experience, and we can advocate for change using our most passionate educator voices. So leaving this session today, please think about your current assessment practices in online, hybrid, blended, or in-person settings, and think about, where is my focus? Are we mostly using assessment of, for, or as learning? Who is at the center of those assessment processes? And what's one adjustment that we can make, or that we have made during COVID times, that has actually led to more effective assessment practices? Teachers are telling us, I stopped doing something I always did in a traditional setting, and it has now benefited my students so much more. And what changes will you pursue post-COVID that will allow students to lead assessment as learning? Don't forget to join us on our Facebook group, facebook.com/group/OPDC-BCIU14. We're going to have a discussion post there on Friday, and we hope that you will join in the conversation around assessment.